Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminolly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, everything I read in May. So May, of course, the month of Horror Mayhem, the fantastic horror-themed reading event created by the Bookish Branch, for which I was very happy to be, again, one of the co-hosts. So I had a really fun reading month in May. I read a lot of horror. I read quite a lot of other stuff as well. I've got 30 things to talk to you about today, including some comics. So I did start getting into comics again towards the end of the month, and I've been really enjoying reading those. So as usual for this this kind of monthly wrap-up style video, I'll go through the books I read in order, and then at the end, if I remember, because I do sometimes forget, at the end I will tell you my book of the month. So as I go through the list with you, see if you can figure out what my favourite book of the month will be. Right, so let's crack on then. So I started off in classic, for me anyway, horror fashion, with a really trashy horror book that I enjoyed enormously. That was Breeding Ground by Shaun Hutson. Shaun Hutson's probably my favourite trashy horror writer. He is enormously trashy. His books are packed with sex and violence, but they're always entertaining, and this was no exception. So this is a sequel to his first novel, Slugs, which is about killer slugs. In this one, there's more killer slugs attacking various people in London. And basically, it's just a series of people getting naked and then getting eaten by slugs. So if that sounds fun, you'll have a great time with this book. I really enjoyed it. After that, I read a Goosebumps book. So I've been really getting into the Goosebumps books recently. I did make a video about kind of the pleasures of reading kids' books recently. So the Goosebumps book I read was Return of the Mummy, which is about a mummy, as the title suggests. So the protagonist, this young kid, his uncle is like an Egyptologist in Egypt, and is indeed Egyptian. So the kid goes to Egypt to spend some time with his uncle and cousin. His cousin's a little bit annoying, and there is a mummy in the pyramid that his uncle is investigating. So yeah, just a fun. The Goosebumps books are always fun. I haven't had a bad time with the Goosebumps book yet, and that was no exception. After that, I reread a book that I first read when it came out in the 90s. I remembered it being quite interesting. It wasn't. I didn't enjoy it much at all second time round. That was Dirty Weekend by Helen Zahavi. So this is a kind of serial killer book about this woman who just gets fed up with men being arseholes, basically, and starts killing them. So it's kind of an interesting premise, but I really didn't think that Helen Zahavi developed that concept in an interesting way at all. It felt like it was trying too hard to be clever, trying too hard to make points, and as a result it just all felt a bit laboured. There's some really dodgy humour in it as well that didn't work at all, and it felt in many ways very dated. So yes, I didn't enjoy that. After that, a book I thought was fantastic. I have done a review of it on the channel. That is I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman, which is kind of a dystopian science fiction book where the central concept is there's a bunker, there's these 40 women enclosed in the bunker, like imprisoned in the bunker. There are male guards who they never get to talk to, and nobody, you need to figure out, or the book is about figuring out why they're there, what's happened to society, etc., etc. A fascinating book, really, really excellent. I can't recommend it highly enough. So if you like the sound of that and you haven't watched my review, have a look for that on the channel. After that, some more science fiction, but very, very different. This was Spencer Edwards' Emperor of the Galaxy by Alex Pryor, a YA sci-fi book about this young British kid who, for no reason at all really, becomes Emperor of the Galaxy. So he gets randomly selected to become the new Emperor of the Galaxy and has to balance like doing his homework and having a new girlfriend with being Emperor of the Galaxy and fighting this evil race of aliens who are trying to take over. It was just a light, fun read, quite funny at times, quite exciting at times, a good kind of battles and stuff like that. Some really good characters. I had a good time with it. After that, back to horror, but horror with a humorous edge to it. So this was The End by Kaleigh Dobbs. a short story collection. I really enjoyed this. I've read another book by Kaleigh Dobbs a few years ago and enjoyed that too. So she writes kind of darkly comic horror stories that feel almost a bit like that kind of sting in the tail style of horror you used to get in like horror anthology TV show type things, if that makes sense. So interesting concepts, a nice use of humour, as I've said, and just well written. So she manages to do that thing that can be difficult in short stories with a relatively small number of pages, setting up a situation, setting up some characters, and then giving you a satisfying outcome. So yeah, definitely another one I recommend. After that, I read the second in the Vampire Hunter D series of light novels by Hideyuki Kikuchi. So this was The Razor of Gales. So Vampire Hunter D is this guy who's half human, half vampire. There's a name for it, but I can't remember what. Is it Dampire or something like that? In the far future, in kind of a post-apocalyptic world, which is kind of reverted to a kind of medieval feudalism, but there's still kind of lingering bits of technology as well. So they're just fun adventure type books with kind of gothic horror overtones. So this is the second one, as I said. I've got a bunch of them on my Kindle, or Kobo, I should say, because I'm not using my Kindle anymore. I've got a bunch of them digitally, and we'll be working my way through them. But yeah, really enjoyed that. Next up, another book I've done a review of on the channel, and another book I loved. This was Flicker by Theodore Roscak. A fascinating book about the movie industry. So a novel, but packed with detail about filmmaking and the history of film in both Europe and America. So about this film student who becomes obsessed with this mysterious filmmaker who moved from Germany to Europe to the US and made these kind of trashy low budget horror films that in some way are really, really unsettling when you watch them. And it's about this guy, the central character Jonathan, trying to get to the bottom of what makes these films so weird and unsettling. I just thought this was a fantastic book, and it's a book I'm surprised isn't talked about more. I really, really thought it was excellent. After that then, some cosy horror. So I read The Haunting of Ashburn House by Darcy Coates. Darcy Coates' books, I think I said this at the time when I talked about it in a weekly wrap-up. Darcy Coates' books are very entertaining. She has decent kind of creepy setups. She has engaging characters, but they're just so surfacey and so light. They leave no imprint on you as a reader at all. So I'd kind of almost completely forgotten this book by the time I finished it, but it was a fun ride while I was reading it. After that, a book that is definitely not cosy horror, Eat Them Alive by Piers Nace. I have a review of that going up on the channel, hopefully this week. If not this week, then next week. The most deranged book I've ever read. Just absolutely bonkers. So about this guy who is very furious with the world for good reasons, who encounters a giant man-eating praying mantis and sets up a buddy movie almost between him and this praying mantis, where they go round and he finds people for the praying mantis to eat. Really, just I can't even find words to describe this book. So weird, so deranged, so graphic, incredibly graphically violent, really sadistic, really horrible, but somehow I just couldn't put it down and I loved it. Okay, next up then, in my continuing read-through of Patricia Highsmith's books that I'm doing with Anne from the channel and Novella, I read The Boy Who Followed Ripley, so the fourth book in the Ripley series, but it feels like the third book in the Ripley series because it carries on directly from the second book. Ripley, this kind of sociopathic American living in Europe. In this one, this teenage boy who's kind of on the run befriends Ripley, and a really interesting kind of character piece as you reflect more on Ripley's character through his interactions with this boy and through things this boy has done. So there are similarities in their characters, and I thought it was a wonderful kind of character study from Highsmith. It has a plot to it. It has kind of a thriller plot to it, but it's much more about Ripley as a character than anything else. So yeah, really, really enjoyed that. And then after that, another horror novella for Horror Mayhem, Who Goes There by John W. Campbell. So this is the story that inspired the movie The Thing from Another World in the 50s, and then John Carpenter's The Thing in the 80s, which is one of my favourite movies of all time. I was surprised by how similar this was to the John Carpenter movie in terms of some of the events and the characters and things like that. Just great stuff, really tense. So, this Antarctic expedition discovers this crashed UFO, and then weird stuff starts happening thereafter. I won't say any more than that in case you haven't seen either of the movies. But yeah, really gripping, suspenseful tale, quite creepy at times, but just kind of claustrophobically tense, I guess I would say. So yeah, enjoyed that very much indeed. Next up, a new book. So this comes out, when does it come out? I think it comes out in July, I want to say. Yeah, it comes out in July. So this is That Which Stands Outside by Mark Morris. This was great. So this was a really gripping, exciting horror story that gradually ramps up. So it starts with like a really super creepy prologue, and then settles back into something more normal. And it's about this guy who's an actor, like a kind of jobbing actor who works as a barman, who meets this young woman who's basically, she's being mugged, and he rescues her from her muggers and forms a relationship with her thereafter. She's from this kind of mysterious island off the coast of Iceland, and they end up going there for various reasons. And there's like weird stuff going on the island. The people who live on the island are very suspicious of this woman for various reasons. And the plot just kind of gradually ramps up as the book progresses, and it becomes like creepier and creepier, but also like more and more just tense, and it was just a really, really entertaining read. The thing that he does fantastically well in this, which not something I think I'd really thought about before, but it's the way he handles characters that really impressed me, because you start with this very narrow focus on like the main character and this woman, and it gradually, like the cast of characters gradually expands as the book progresses, and you feel like as you're going through it, you get to know each of these characters enough that when things when things really start going down towards the end of the book, you care about the different characters, despite the fact there's quite a wide cast of them by then. So yeah, I thought it was a really excellent horror novel. After that, something very different. So I read a middle grade horror book, Horror Collector Book 1, The Faceless Kid, by Midori Sato. So this is a kind of Japanese light novel for kids, a series of short stories, all of which are based on kind of urban myths, with kind of child protagonists, like actually genuinely quite creepy at times, which surprised me, but also just a fun light read. Not fantastic by any means, but I did quite enjoy it. After that, a very disturbing, I hesitate to use the word extreme horror when I talk about this author, but he does get that label sometimes. So this is All Too Soon by Brian Boyer. So Brian's books are extreme in terms of the situations that he talks about. There's some really horrific stuff in this book, but he never lingers on them in the way that, when I think about extreme horror, I think about books that are kind of almost sadistically fascinated with the details of violence. And that isn't something that comes across in Brian's books at all. He's interested in showing you the darker side of humanity, and talking interestingly about that, but he doesn't dwell on the details, and his books are all the more powerful, I think, as a result of that, because you feel impacted by the events of the book rather than sickened by the events of the book, if that makes sense. So yeah, really, really interesting book. So about this young girl who's, like, for various reasons is an alcoholic and a drug dealer, and her girlfriend is related to someone who's a serial killer. There's all sorts of stuff going on in this book, but I thought it was fantastic. So yeah, another one I would recommend. After that, another kind of shorter work of horror. So this was In the Tall Grass by Stephen King and Joe Hill, which I'd had a copy of for ages and hadn't got around to reading. This was okay. I didn't love it, but it was okay. So it's about this brother and sister who are travelling across America. They stop by the side of the road. There's some tall grass by the side of the road, and they hear a mother and son kind of in distress in the tall grass, and they go in to investigate, and weird stuff happens thereafter. It was quite creepy at times, and it had a decent kind of gradual ramping up of the tension, but for some reason it just didn't quite click with me. So I enjoyed it, but I didn't think it was great. After that, the final book in the Witches series by James Darke, which I've been reading for a while now. So this is book 8, The Plague. So this is a trashy series of kind of sex and violence horror novels that were published in the UK in the 80s. But they're better than you would expect from the covers. So this one, so set during the kind of, you know, like the witchfinder era in Britain, kind of around the time of the Civil War. In this one, the hero is going up against these characters who've come up in previous books. This lord and his wife who are like horrifically sadistic. But you've also got the plague starting to infect people in England and playing a part as well. So some enjoyably disgusting kind of plague style detail, but also the kind of conclusion of this plot line involving this lord and his wife. I felt like this was a bit of a letdown as an ending to the series, because it doesn't feel like there's a continuing narrative through the series that kind of comes to a climax in this one, if that makes sense. But it was still a fun read, and I'm very glad to have managed to finally get hold of copies of all of the books in the series. So big thanks to people out there who've helped me do that. After that, then I read the new Stephen King book, You Like It Darker. So there is a review of that on the channel. So a collection of 12 short stories, which was, you know, definitely a mixed bag. There were some in here I thought were fantastic, including Danny Coughlan's Bad Dream, which is kind of a almost novel length kind of crime mystery story, which I thought was fantastic. There's a couple of kind of darker stories that I quite like. There's one like very moving, kind of quite sweet story called The Answer Man, which I enjoyed, but some of the stories I didn't like as much. So, as is often the case with short story collections, you know, some good and some bad, but overall I really enjoyed the experience of reading it. You know, I've got a long-standing relationship with Stephen King as a reader, and I always have a good time in his company. After that, then another kind of older horror novel or work of horror that inspired classic movies. That is Invasion of the Body Snatchers, or The Body Snatchers as it was originally known by Jack Finney. So if you've seen the movies, you know what to expect for this. And I did find, more so than with The Thing. So with The Thing, you know, clearly I haven't actually seen the original Thing from Another World, but I have seen John Carpenter's The Thing. So I knew what was going to happen, but I still enjoyed the book. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, I knew what was going to happen, and I felt like it spoiled the book a bit for me. And I'm not sure why there's that difference between the two, but I didn't enjoy this as much as Who Goes There. It's still a good read. It's really tense. There's kind of mystery and suspense and horror kind of gradually ramps up as you go through the book. But it just didn't click with me for some reason. I thought it was really good, but I didn't massively enjoy it, if that makes sense. Continuing that theme then, we have We're Here to Hurt Each Other by Paula Diaz, which is a short story collection that came out a few years ago. So I thought this was really, really well written, but I didn't particularly enjoy it. I didn't get into the stories in a way that, you know, meant that I was really invested in them. But Paula Diaz, she's clearly a good writer. I thought her prose was really good, and she does a great job. As I said with the Kaleigh Dobbs book, she does a great job of setting up a situation and characters in a short space of time, and, you know, immersing you in those enough that you feel like you're invested in the story. The thing that really impressed me about this was there's a real range of different time periods that she writes about and different styles of story, and I thought she handled that really, really well. But as I say, for some reason, this was a book that I just didn't really connect with, so I didn't love it as a result. After that then, we have my patrons and channel members book club pick for the month, which is Road of Bones by Christopher Golden, which is like a kind of a very Hollywoody style of horror. So really fast paced, really high octane, about these two guys who are like reality TV filmmakers who've travelled to Siberia and I'm trying to make a like TV series, or setting up to make a TV series about travelling along this highway, which is called the Road of Bones. Which is like, so it's like one of those horror novels where there's a lot of stuff about the environment. So they're in an incredibly harsh environment, so you get a lot of that. But there's also kind of lots of creepy goings on. There's like weird creatures and stuff like that. I really enjoyed it. It's like the Darcy Coates book. It's like very light and surfacey. There's not a lot of substance here, but it's a really, really fun read, and it definitely left more of an impression on me than the Darcy Coates book did. So just like really suspenseful, really entertaining, some great kind of action set pieces, some really creepy bits. The two central characters I really enjoyed as well. So yeah, I had a really good time with it. After that then we have Island Red by Matt Serafini, which is kind of a B-movie creature feature type horror story set in around Florida during kind of spring break. So you've got kind of spring break type stuff going on, but you've also got this shark that's been possessed by some kind of alien being. You've got all sorts of like weird kind of zombie type stuff going on as well. There was a lot going on in this book, but I didn't really engage with it, if I'm honest. For some reason, I just couldn't quite get into it enough to really, really enjoy it. Fantastic cover though. After that then, the first of the comics I read this month, and there will be a few more. So this was the Scream and Misty special from 2017. So Scream and Misty, two British horror comics. Scream being a more kind of traditional like EC horror comics style of horror comic. Misty being a kind of more gothic romance style of horror comic, I guess. So this is a special, so features short stories featuring different characters from kind of long-running strips in those two comics. I didn't love it, if I'm honest, because I think I wasn't really familiar with the characters. I couldn't really get into the short stories about them. So it was kind of a reasonably diverting read for the kind of bank holiday afternoon, but I didn't love it. After that, we have Men's Adventure Quarterly, issue 8, Heavy Hitters, which is edited by Robert Dice and Bill Cunningham, and has an article by YouTube's own Gary Levisi. So this is really entertaining, as these Men's Adventure Quarterly magazines always are. So they feature articles and stories and things like that from Men's Adventure magazines of the 50s, 60s and 70s. So real kind of vintage trash vibe to it. This one all about hitmen and hit women. One of the best stories actually was about a hit woman. I really enjoyed it, as I always do with these. Just pure trashy entertainment. Very entertaining and just lovingly put together as well. They really do a fantastic job of kind of presenting these stories in the way they were originally presented, which makes them hugely entertaining, and really interesting articles as well, including one about this guy whose name now escapes me, who was like a male model who ended up being the like the model that artists use for a lot of kind of pulp magazine, like Men's Adventure magazine illustrations, but also paperback covers. So if you're familiar with the Doc Savage paperback series published by Bantam, I think it was, this guy, it was the model for Doc Savage on those covers. So really, really interesting reading about him. Right, moving on then, we're into the final few. So another comic, so this was Judge Dredd, The Complete Case Files Volume 5. So Judge Dredd, long-running sci-fi horror comic in the UK, part of the comic 2000 AD, so a kind of constant in 2000 AD over the years. I was a huge fan of 2000 AD and Judge Dredd when I was younger. Really enjoyed reading this. So this was a collection of stories, some of them shorter Judge Dredd stories, and then one really long one called The Apocalypse War, which was fantastic. So just fun, kind of gritty sci-fi. I've always found, I think the thing that makes Judge Dredd work for me anyway as a comic is that it's a comic that's very much about America. It's set in America. It's got a kind of American style of kind of tough guy, almost like a Western style sheriff type character, in Judge Dredd. But it's British. So it's written with that kind of slight distance. So whilst it's a bit like something like RoboCop. So the movie RoboCop, if you think about it, it's really easy to enjoy RoboCop going round, dispensing justice and, shooting bad guys and stuff like that. But there's also that kind of step back that recognises that this is, probably not the way we should go about law enforcement. And I think Judge Dredd does something similar. It's that kind of that reflection on the American addiction to guns and violence, I think is really interesting. After that, then 3 hard case crime novels that I read back to back. So the first of those was the Corpse War Pasties by Johnny Porkpie, which is just a fantastic title and author name. So this is a mystery novel set in the burlesque scene in New York. Johnny Porkpie, as well as being the author, is the central character in the book, and he works in the burlesque scene in real life. So this is about a burlesque performer who dies on stage. He's poisoned, and Johnny Porkpie is kind of like the prime suspect, and it's about him trying to clear his name by figuring out what's actually happened. So a very entertaining, quite funny at times. Not a great mystery. I figured out what the twist was fairly early on, but it was a fun read. I did enjoy it. After that, another book related to Doc Savage, so Honey in His Mouth by Lester Dent. So Lester Dent was the creator of Doc Savage, so Doc Savage being this kind of pulp hero in the 30s and 40s. This is a later novel by Lester Dent, which I think hadn't been published until Hard Case Crime published it. So this is just a fun thriller about this guy who's a con man who gets helped out of a jam by this mysterious organisation, and they've got something they want him to do, and the reason they want him to do it is because he facially looks exactly like this other person. I won't tell you any more than that because it will spoil the plot, but it was just a really fun, very silly, but very fast-paced thriller with some nice humour in it as well. It had some surprisingly good humour in it. It wasn't necessarily packed with action, but it was packed with kind of twists and turns. And then after that, The Cutie by Donald E. Westlake. So Westlake is one of those crime writers I definitely need to read more by. I think I've read a couple of things by him years and years ago, but not much more recently than that. This one I didn't love. I didn't quite get into it as much as I expected to. So it's about this guy who's like an enforcer for the mob, would have been a candidate to be in Heavy Hitters, who is this guy who's a drug dealer who's involved with the mob in various ways, kind of turns up at his apartment in the middle of the night. Something bad has gone down, and the guy then disappears, and the mob want the central character to find this guy and protect him. So it was a fun thriller. There were some mystery elements as well, but as I say, I didn't quite get into it as much as I would have liked to. And then I finished out the month with the first 2 volumes of Saga by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples, a much-loved comic book series which loads of people have recommended to me. And I finally got around to reading it. I bought the first 10 volumes of it, like the collected editions from Humble Bundle a while ago, and just hadn't got around to reading them. I'm definitely going to continue reading them because I think this is a wonderful series. So a sci-fi fantasy series about there's an ongoing war. A man on one side of the war and a woman on the other side of the war fall in love and have a baby, and that's kind of the setup for it. But it's really inventive, it's really gripping and exciting, some great humour in it. It's quite spicy at times, and wonderfully for me, it has at its centre this trashy novel that both of them have read, which is really meaningful to them, and that's like a really important plot point in the story. And for me, as a lover of trashy novels, I thought that just gives it an extra edge for me. So I'm really enjoying the series so far, and will continue reading it. So that is what I have read in May, and I have remembered that I need to tell you my favourite book of the month. So if you've been trying to predict it, let's see if you got it right. So my favourite book of the month, the book I am completely obsessed with still, even after finishing it, is Flicker by Theodore Roscak. I think I will definitely read this book again at some point. I just thought it was so fantastic. It's so long, it's so in-depth, it's so ponderous at times, but it's also absolutely fascinating, and I loved it. I loved the experience of reading it so much. So yes, and I've got to say, I read this as a buddy read with Alex from the channel The Bookubus. So thanks again for that, Alex. I really enjoyed the buddy reading experience. Alex, it's fair to say, didn't enjoy the book quite as much as I did. I think she liked it, but she didn't love it like I did. take from that what you will. This is not a book for everyone, partly because it's so long and so slow, but I thought it was really fantastic. So yes, that's what I've read in May. Let me know if you correctly predicted my favourite book of the month. Let me know what you've read in May, what you've enjoyed. And as always, thanks very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff. And I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.